The Emperor's New Concerto, a modification of Hans Christian Andersen by Fred Haight. Many years ago, there was an emperor who was so fond of music that he spent all his time and money on it. He cared nothing for his soldiers or his people, and instead of saying, as one does about any other king, he is in his council chamber, one always said, the emperor is in his music studio. Life was very gay in the great town where he lived. Hosts of strangers came in to visit every day, and among them was a charlatan. He gave himself out as a master composer and said that he knew how to compose the music of the spheres, more beautiful than what the angels played in heaven. However, he cautioned that this music's beauty was of a type never before heard in this world and would not reveal itself easily. Its beauty would remain hidden to anyone who was either stupid or was unfit for his post. In fact, to people of such a mindset, the music could even appear to be ugly. The man informed the emperor that he was so skilled in music that he had no need of scales, either major or minor, nor even of the keys that had so constrained conventional music for centuries. He would legislate that all 12 of God's tones were to be treated as absolute equals and dash to pieces the feudal class system. No tone should ever again hold a dominant or even a subdominant position over another. It must be gorgeous music, thought the emperor. By playing it, I shall discover which men in my kingdom are unfit for their posts. I shall distinguish the wise men from the fools. Yes, I will commission a new concerto from this man. He paid the man a lot of money in advance, so that he might begin at once. The man pocketed the money, though, and began churning out page after page of music using a most curious method. He took 12 dice, each in the shape of a dodecahedron, and each with all of the 12 tones written on it, tossed them, and then proceeded to line them up in a row, which he then wrote down. Next, he would walk around the table, stand on his head, and write down the road as it appeared upside down, all the while mumbling strange words and numbers. He then placed the dice in front of a mirror and wrote down how the notes appeared backwards. And finally, stood on his head, looking at the mirror, and wrote down how the notes appeared backwards and upside down at the same time. From this, he devised a chart that opened up whole new universes way beyond anything ever seen in the primitive tonal or so-called common practice period. Frustrated at never hearing anything played or sung, the emperor thought, I should like to know how this fellow was getting along, but felt a little odd when he reflected that anyone who was stupid or unfit for his post would only hear ugliness. He certainly thought that he need have no fears for himself, but still he thought he would send somebody else first to see how it was getting on. Everyone in the kingdom knew about the wonderful power the music possessed, and everyone was anxious to see just how stupid his neighbor was. I will send my faithful old music critic to the composer, thought the emperor. He will best be able to judge how this work sounds, for he is a fine judge of music and is very clever. So, the music critic went to the prophet composer and asked to hear a few minutes of the new concerto. The charlatan engaged the help of his concertmaster, sat down at the piano, and the two of them began to play a reduction of the full orchestral score. Heaven preserve us, thought the old critic, opening his eyes very wide. I have not heard one note that was not ugly and repulsive. But he took care not to say so. Good heavens, thought he, is it possible that I am a fool? I've never thought so, and nobody must know it. Am I not fit for my post? It would never do to say that I cannot hear the beauty of this work. Oh, it is beautiful, quite charming, said the critic, looking through his spectacles. Such bold harmonies and rhythms. I will certainly tell the Emperor that your work pleases me very much. I am delighted to hear you say so, said the charlatan, who then described his use of inversion, retrograde, diminution, etc., just like old Bach in his Art of the Few. The old music critic paid great attention to what the charlatan said, so as to be able to repeat it when he got home to the Emperor. The Emperor was still not satisfied, and soon sent his court composer, who, unlike the critic, had actually written music, and who was also old enough to remember what music had sounded like a mere 50 years earlier. The court composer, being a bit suspicious, said, "Say, is it not odd to compose music by the throwing of the dice, my good fellow?" The composer became huffy and said, "You have obviously not studied the writings of Judge Bridlegoose in Rabelais' Car Libre. Judge Bridlegoose determines, after a lifetime on the bench, that he convicts exactly the same number of innocent men and lets exactly the same percentage of guilty scallywags off scot-free, whether he decides the case by the most careful weighing of the evidence or simply by throwing the dice. Since the latter saves time and money while yielding the same results, it is now the preferred means of jurisprudence everywhere." So everything in the universe is then merely the result of chance and random happenings, said the horrified court composer. "Oh no," said the charlatan, "the exact opposite. I do not just accept whatever the dice give me. If there are 3 notes in a row that belong to the same key, that would be favoritism of one note or the other. So I throw the dice again until I get a row that has no resemblance to any key whatsoever. Once that is accomplished, I then create all the permutations of the row, and the composition follows them rigorously. There is not one note left to chance. Every single note follows those rows. There are fools who compose according to chance and randomness," said the charlatan, "and they call their school by a fancy name the aleatoric." He did not realize that that name came from the Greek word alea, meaning dice. And he could never appreciate the great irony that in the future, in blindfold tests, expert musicians would listen to serial music where every single note was predetermined by a tone row, and listen to aleatoric music where everything was done according to chance and randomness, and be unable to tell the difference. So the court composer sighed, sat down, and listened to what the composer said was the obvious adagio cantabile section of his work. "I know I am not a fool," thought the court composer, "so I must be unfit for my post. It is exceedingly strange music, though. I cannot hear how any given phrase relates to either the phrase before or after it. Still, I must not let appear that I find it so." So he praised its cantabile qualities, which he could not hear, and assured the charlatan of his delight in his mastery of form. "It is absolutely splendid," he said to the Emperor. Everyone in town was now talking about what would soon be the world's newest and best concerto. Now the Emperor thought he would like to hear it while it was still being written, so he went to the composer with his entire musical entourage around him. They implored of the charlatan to please play a small passage for them. "It is magnificent," said his musicians, led by the critic and court composer as the charlatan played. "What contrapuntal skill, what emancipation of the dissonance! What? Thought the emperor. I cannot make any sense of it. This is terrible. Am I a fool? Am I not fit to be emperor? Why, nothing worse could happen to me. He did not yet know of Louis XVI and his fate. Oh, it is beautiful, said the emperor. It has my highest approval. Nothing would induce him to say that he only heard cacophony, even if it were dodecacacophony, for that is the name the charlatan had chosen for it. The whole entourage listened and listened, though they heard nothing proportional or even rational. However, they all exclaimed with his majesty, "It is magnificent, gorgeous, excellent." The charlatan stayed up all night, finishing the concerto, so that it might be ready for the world premiere the next day. The entire kingdom came out for the concert. The orchestra had all of their parts handwritten for them, though they worried that they could not tell the concerto's beginning from its end or its middle. The emperor sat beside the composer on the piano bench. He read music well enough to have the honor of turning pages, though he despaired of knowing exactly when a page should be turned. As the concerto unfolded, the audience gasped and oohed and awed. "How beautiful," said one. "What a fine cadenza," said another. "I can hear all 48 permutations of the original tone row," said a haughty fellow whose nose pointed upwards at a 45-degree angle. No concerto had ever been so successful before. "But it's just noise," said a little boy. "Oh, listen to the innocent one," said the child's father. But one person after another whispered what the child had said. "It's just noise." "A child says it's just noise." "It is nothing but noise," cried all the people at last. The emperor withered, for he knew it was true. But he thought, appearances must be kept, the show must go on. So he turned pages even more intently, and the charlatan and the orchestra played on until the curtain came down. And no one listened happily ever after.